Welcome to our webinar on Level 1 users. My name is Callum. I'm a solicitor in Field Seymour Parks' immigration and employment teams. Before we get started, I should flag that this webinar may be a little confusing if you're entirely unfamiliar with sponsorship licenses, or if you don't know what the sponsorship management system is. If you're entirely new to the world of sponsorship in immigration, I would recommend that you first watch our Introduction to Sponsorship webinar, which is available on our website, as this provides much of the background upon which this webinar builds. What is a Level 1 user? Well, as we briefly covered in the Introduction to Sponsorship webinar, the Level 1 user is one of the key personnel on your sponsor license, who is responsible for the day-to-day management of the license. The Level 1 user does this through their access to the Sponsorship Management System, or SMS, which is the online portal used to manage the sponsor license. Using the SMS, the Level 1 user can apply for, assign, and manage certificates of sponsorship, allowing for the sponsorship of prospective and existing migrant workers. They can also report changes of circumstances, whether those relate to sponsored migrant workers or to the organisation as a whole. I'll cover this in more depth in a moment. Because the Level 1 user has direct access to the SMS, this is quite an admin-heavy role, which, depending on the number of migrant workers employed by your organisation, might require the Level 1 user to regularly log on to the SMS and input information. It is therefore usually best if the Level 1 user is someone with the capacity to take on this sort of administrative work, subject to the oversight of a more senior authorising officer. Of course, that will not always be possible, and in smaller organisations, it is relatively standard for the Level 1 user to be a director or other senior employee. There is also an argument that having the authorising officer and Level 1 user be the same person simplifies management of the licence and reduces the need for multiple people within the business to familiarise themselves with the sponsorship duties and the SMS. We've already spoken a bit about the practical considerations when deciding who should be a Level 1 user, but there are also some legal restrictions on who can fill this role. When you apply for your sponsor license, the named Level 1 user in your application must be an office holder, for example, a statutory director, or an employee of the company. Once your sponsor license is in place, you can add more Level 1 users to your license, though the Home Office does recommend keeping the number of Level 1 users on your license to a minimum where possible. Additional Level 1 users do not have to be employees or office holders of the company, and may instead be legal representatives or HR consultants. Regardless of whether the Level 1 user is being included at the application stage or being added after the license is in place, there are some other factors that must be taken into account when deciding whether a prospective Level 1 user is appropriate for the role. Level 1 users must be permanently based in the UK, with a permanent right of residence here, ordinarily by possessing a British or Irish passport, or by having indefinite leave to remain. Level 1 users also must not have a history of non-compliance with sponsorship requirements, and must not have any unspent criminal convictions. It is worth checking both of these points with your prospective Level 1 user before adding them to your license. Level 1 users are not necessarily permanently linked to the sponsor license. You can remove a Level 1 user where, for example, they are leaving the company or changing their role, although you do not need to provide any reason as to why a Level 1 user is being taken off the license. To remove the Level 1 user from the license and remove their access to the SMS, another Level 1 user on the license must access the SMS and deactivate the Level 1 user. It is important to ensure that, at all times, there is at least one Level 1 user on the license who is either an employee or an officer. New Level 1 users are also added on the SMS by providing their personal details. The new Level 1 user will receive their password in an email, while the old Level 1 user who added them will need to tell them their user ID. Both pieces of information together allow the new Level 1 user to log into their Level 1 user account and access the SMS. As mentioned, Level 1 users are responsible for adding and removing other Level 1 users. They can also add and remove Level 2 users. Level 2 users are similar to Level 1 users in that they have access to the SMS, but their access is more limited, and they cannot do everything that Level 1 users can do. Level 1 users are also responsible for certificates of sponsorship. As mentioned in our Introduction to Sponsorship webinar, a certificate of sponsorship must be assigned to a migrant worker in order for the company to sponsor them. The migrant then uses the certificate of sponsorship reference number when applying for their visa to confirm their sponsorship and their eligibility for the sponsored visa. Level 1 users need to be involved in this process as they need to apply for an appropriate certificate of sponsorship, whether for overseas migrants or those who are already in the UK, and then assign these to the relevant migrant by inputting their personal details. Once a certificate of sponsorship is assigned to a migrant, the Level 1 user may need to add a sponsor note to it on the SMS, where an error has been made on the certificate, or where certain details have changed between the assignment of the certificate and the migrant's visa application. For example, where the migrant gets a new passport during this time. Level 1 users also need to report changes of circumstances. We touched on this in our Introduction to Sponsorship webinar, but to reiterate, Level 1 users need to report certain migrant worker activity, such as absences from work, changes in role, or substantial increases in salary. Level 1 users also need to report such changes affecting the organization. For example, a change in the business's address or trading name, or a change in control. It is also the Level 1 user who will handle replacing and changing the details of key personnel on the SMS, including the authorizing officer, key contact, and other Level 1 users as mentioned. Finally, because they have access to the SMS, the Level 1 users also have visibility of the communication board, which the Home Office use to provide updates and guidance on license management, as well as for flagging any ongoing issues with the system. Level 1 users should keep an eye on this and report back to their authorizing officer on any areas of concern or interest which might affect the company's license or their ability to recruit migrant workers in the short term. Managing a sponsor license can be quite a daunting prospect, particularly for a Level 1 user with little experience of the SMS or knowledge of immigration practices. Under our retainer service, we can be added to your license as a Level 1 user to manage the license on your behalf. This includes reporting changes of circumstances and applying for and assigning certificates of sponsorship for your migrant workers. We also carry out an annual health check on the license to ensure that all information is up to date and provide a checklist of your sponsorship duties so that you're clear as to what information needs to be passed on to us for reporting on SMS and as to your record keeping obligations. We can also provide training on the use of the SMS if that is something that you would like to take a more hands-on approach with in due course. That's all from me for today. If you have any questions about the role of a Level 1 user or our retainer service, please feel free to get in touch with me at callum.defreitas@fsp-law.com. And if you would like, you can also connect with me on LinkedIn using the QR code on screen.